The silence in our kitchen at 6 in the morning has a specific weight to it. It's not the peaceful silence of a house at rest. It's the heavy, expectant quiet of a museum after the doors have locked. I moved through it with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has spent 34 years learning where every floorboard creaks and which cabinet hinges need oiling. I set the kettle on the stove. The click of the gas igniter was the only heartbeat in the room. Gerald would be down in exactly 12 minutes. He likes his coffee at a temperature that would scald most people, served in the heavy stoneware mug his father gave him. He likes the newspaper folded to the left of his plate, never touched by me first. He likes to believe that his morning runs smoothly because he is a disciplined man, not because I am a meticulous one. I reached into the back of the pantry, behind the decorative canisters of flour and sugar we never use, and pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a diary. I don't have the energy for prose or the vanity to think my feelings deserve a narrative. It was a log. Dates, times, and dollar amounts. August 14th. Gerald claimed he was at a site visit in Oak Haven. $142 at the Gilded Lily, a bistro 3 towns over. August 17th. My sister, Eileen, called to say she couldn't make our weekly lunch because of a migraine. Her car was seen in the Oak Haven municipal lot at 2 p.m. I closed the book when I heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of Gerald's slippers on the stairs. By the time he entered the kitchen, the ledger was gone, and I was pouring his coffee. "Morning, Martha," he said, not looking at me. His eyes were already glued to his phone. He has a way of standing that occupies the center of the room, leaving me to navigate the periphery. "Good morning," I replied. "Did you sleep well?" Fine. I have a long day at the firm. Don't wait up for dinner." Eileen mentioned she might stop by later to help you with the garden plans, though. She said you seemed overwhelmed lately. I felt the familiar, sharp sting of a small mercy delivered like a blow. Eileen is 4 years younger than me, an interior designer with a penchant for silk scarves and the kind of effortless grace that makes my sensible wool cardigans look like shrouds. She has always been the vibrant one, while I was the reliable one. "I'm not overwhelmed, Gerald," I said quietly, setting his toast down. "I'm just tired." "Well, that's what I mean. You're getting older, Martha. It's natural to lose a step. Let Eileen help. She has the eye for it anyway." He didn't look up to see the way my hand tightened on the counter. He didn't see the way I observed the slight tremor in his own fingers as he scrolled through his messages he keeps behind a passcode I've known for 3 months. I am a retired research librarian. Gerald has always underestimated my ability to find things that don't want to be found. The front door chimed at 10, exactly as Gerald's car cleared the driveway. Eileen didn't knock. She never does. She entered with a gust of expensive perfume and the clatter of bangles. "Martha, darling, you look comfortable," she said, her eyes sweeping over my faded denim apron. She leaned in to press a cheek against mine, but her eyes were already scanning the mail on the entryway table. I brought some samples for the patio. Gerald and I were talking about how that space is just wasted on you right now. "Wasted on me?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen to put on another pot of tea. "You know what I mean. You just sit out there and stare at the bird feeder. Gerald thinks we could turn it into a proper entertaining space, something with life." She sat at the kitchen island, pulling out fabric swatches in shades of seafoam and cream, colors that would never survive a season in this climate. She talked about flow and energy, her voice a melodic hum that I used to find comforting. Now it sounded like the drone of a mosquito. As she leaned over the table, her phone buzzed. She didn't pick it up, but she shifted her body just enough to shield the screen from me. It was a practiced movement, subtle and fluid. "Is that work?" I asked, pouring the tea. "Just a client," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You know how they are, demanding." "I do know," I said, sliding the cup toward her. "People can be so entitled when they think they've paid for something they haven't quite earned yet." Eileen paused, her tea halfway to her lips. She looked at me then, really looked at me, with a flicker of something that might have been suspicion if she didn't find me so profoundly dull. "What a strange thing to say, Martha." "Is it? I just mean that some people expect loyalty they haven't cultivated. It's a common oversight." I smiled at her, the mask I've worn for 30 years held firmly in place. I watched her relax, watched her dismiss my comment as the rambling of a sister who has spent too much time alone with her books. Later that afternoon, after Eileen had left with a flurry of promises to return for cocktail hour on Friday, I went into Gerald's study. It's a room I rarely enter, filled with his awards, his architectural sketches, and the smell of expensive tobacco. I sat in his leather chair and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Behind a false back, a clever bit of carpentry he was very proud of when he built it, sat a manila envelope. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was inside. The deed to the beach house in Maine. The one he told me he had sold 5 years ago to cover the losses from a bad investment. The investment hadn't been bad. It had been a ghost. He hadn't sold the house. He had just moved it out of my reach. Or so he thought. I stood up and smoothed the rug where my chair had left a slight indentation. I am a grandmother. I am a mother. I am a wife. I have spent my life making sure everyone else's needs are met before they even realize they have them. They think I am part of the furniture, useful, stationary, and incapable of change. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the clock. It was nearly time to pick up my grandson Leo from preschool. I had been preparing for this for a long time. They think they are stealing my life from under me, piece by piece, like scavengers. What they don't realize is that I've been the one holding the map all along. I reached into the flower vase on the counter and pulled out a small encrypted thumb drive I'd hidden among the silk lilies. I slipped it into my pocket and grabbed my keys. The air was turning cold. A storm was coming, the weather report said. But as I stepped out onto the porch, looking at the garden Eileen wanted to fix, I felt a strange, icy calm. The first movement of the game was over. Now, the board was beginning to tilt. Leo is 4 years old, and he is the only person in this family who looks at me as if I am a solid object. To everyone else, I have become translucent, a soft focus background against which they play out their more interesting lives. When I picked him up from preschool, he handed me a drawing of a blue dog with 5 legs. "It's for you, Grandma," he said, his sticky hand lingering on my sleeve. "Because you always wait." The words hit me with a dull thud. Children have a way of identifying a tragedy before they have the vocabulary to name it. I do always wait. I wait for Gerald to come home. I wait for my daughter Claire to remember to call. I wait for the world to notice that I haven't actually disappeared. Claire arrived at my house 30 minutes late to collect him. She didn't come inside. She left the engine of her SUV running, the vibrating hum rattling the windows of the living room. She was on a hands-free call, her face tight with the professional agitation of a woman who manages 36 accounts at a mid-sized marketing firm. "Mom, can you just walk him out?" she mouthed through the glass. I put on Leo's coat, buttoning it with fingers that felt unusually heavy. When we reached the car, Claire rolled down the window just enough for the cool air to rush in. "Thanks, Mom. Sorry I can't stay. Did Eileen call you? She said she was going to drop off some decor magazines. She's so worried you're getting stuck in this house." "She stopped by," I said, my voice caught in the exhaust fumes. "She has a lot of ideas for someone who doesn't live here." Claire sighed, a sound of practiced maternal patience. "Don't be prickly. Eileen is just trying to help. She has so much energy, doesn't she? I don't know where she gets it. She's like a breath of fresh air compared to, well, you know, life is just heavy right now." Compared to me, I thought. The gray sky, the reliable foundation, the person who makes sure the car seats are buckled and the taxes are filed so the breath of fresh air has a stable room to blow through. "I'll see you Sunday for dinner?" I asked. "If I can. Check with Eileen, she's coordinating the menu with Dad. They have this whole theme in mind." Claire waved a hand dismissively as she pulled away, Leo's small face pressed against the back window, his blue dog drawing already discarded on the floor mat. I stood in the driveway until the sound of the engine faded. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that suggests everyone is watching from behind their curtains, but no one is actually there. Inside, the house felt colder. I went to the hallway and looked at the gallery wall, 30 years of family history trapped in mahogany frames. There was a photo of Gerald and me at the Grand Canyon. I looked young, vibrant, and incredibly naive. Next to it was a photo from last Christmas. Eileen was in the center, wearing a red silk dress that caught every glimmer of light, her arm linked through Gerald's as they laughed at some private joke. I was on the edge of the frame, holding a tray of appetizers, my face blurred by the camera's focus on the vibrant ones. Psychologically, there is a comfort in being overlooked. It provides a sanctuary. When people stop seeing you, they stop guarding themselves against you. They speak louder on their phones. They leave their receipts in their pockets. They forget that you were once a woman who spent 40 hours a week cross-referencing obscure municipal records. Gerald returned at 7. He smelled of cold air and something faint, something like jasmine and expensive gin. It wasn't the smell of a man who had been at a construction site all day. "Dinner's in the oven," I said, not looking up from the sweater I was mending. "I already ate," he said, tossing his briefcase onto the sofa. "Had a late meeting with a consultant. I told you not to bother, Martha." "You didn't, actually, but that's fine. I'll wrap it up for your lunch tomorrow." He walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a scotch. The glass clinked against the decanter, a sharp, aggressive sound in the quiet room. "Eileen called me today. She's worried about you. She says you're acting distant, snapping at her." "I didn't snap, Gerald. I merely observed that her taste in patio furniture isn't practical for our budget." Gerald turned, his eyes narrowing. "Our budget is fine, Martha. I've worked hard to make sure you never have to worry about money. The least you could do is show some gratitude when your sister tries to bring a little beauty into this drab place." The word drab hung in the air like a physical weight. He wasn't talking about the house. "I am very grateful," I said softly, my needle piercing the wool. "I am grateful for everything I've learned recently." He paused, the glass halfway to his lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that life is a series of lessons, Gerald. Don't you agree? Even at our age, we can be surprised by what we find when we look closely." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for a spark of defiance, but I kept my expression flat, my eyes focused on the torn seam of his sweater. He eventually huffed a laugh, dismissing me, as he always did. "You're getting morbid. Maybe Eileen is right. You need a hobby, something to keep your mind from wandering." He headed upstairs, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the ceiling. I waited until I heard the shower running. Then, I went to the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. Beneath the spare batteries and takeout menus, I pulled out a small, high-end digital recorder I'd bought a month ago. I checked the battery. I don't just watch, and I don't just record numbers in a ledger. I've started mapping the architecture of their betrayal. I know the frequency of their consultation calls. I know that the consultant Gerald met tonight has the same initials as my sister. But more importantly, I know what Gerald doesn't. The beach house in Maine isn't just a hidden asset. It's the key to a legal maneuver I've been studying in the quiet hours at the public library. The one place they would never think to look for me. I sat at the kitchen table, the blue dog drawing in front of me. I began to write a letter, not to Gerald, and not to Eileen. It was a letter to a woman I used to know. A woman who didn't wait, but who moved with purpose. I heard the shower stop. The house was settling, the wood groaning as the temperature dropped. I looked at the clock. It was 9:42 p.m. In exactly 18 minutes, Gerald's phone would buzz with a text message that said, "Good night, G." And he would smile at his reflection in the mirror, thinking he was the architect of a brilliant, secret life. He has no idea that I am the one who built the walls.
And I am the only one who knows where the structural weaknesses are. The following morning, the humiliation arrived, disguised as a gesture of concern. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed, the one Eileen had decided was exhausted, when Gerald's car pulled back into the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home for lunch. He didn't get out of the car immediately. I watched him through the trellis, my hands deep in the cold, damp earth. He was on the phone, his face animated in a way it never is when he's speaking to me. He was laughing, a genuine, throat-clearing sound that I hadn't heard in years. Then, as he caught sight of me, the mask slid back into place. The laughter vanished, replaced by a tight, practiced line of pity. "Martha," he called out, stepping onto the grass. He didn't come close enough to help me up. "I thought we agreed you'd leave the heavy lifting to the landscapers Eileen found." "It's just weeding, Gerald. It keeps my hands busy." "It's not just weeding. You've been out here for 3 hours. Mrs. Gable from next door called me. She said you were just standing there, staring at the fence for 20 minutes. I felt a cold prickle of alarm. I hadn't been staring at the fence. I had been counting the boards, calculating the cost of a new perimeter for the property, part of the inventory I was quietly taking. Mrs. Gable is 90 and can barely see her own porch, let alone mine. "I was thinking about the lilies," I said calmly, wiping my hands on my apron. "See? This is what I'm talking about. The fogginess," he sighed, checking his watch. "I've made an appointment for you. Dr. Ariskas. Friday at 2. "A neurologist?" I asked, my voice steady despite the hammer of my heart. "Just a checkup, for my peace of mind. And Eileen's. She's very worried that you're losing track of things. You forgot to turn the burner off under the kettle yesterday, Martha. She found it whistling itself dry." I looked at him. I had used the electric kettle that morning, which shuts off automatically. The stovetop kettle hadn't been touched in weeks. Eileen had staged it. It was a clumsy play, the kind of thing people do when they think their target is too dim-witted to notice the mechanics of the lie. "I'll go to the appointment," I said, "if it makes you feel better." "Good. I just want you to be safe." He patted my shoulder, 2 quick clinical taps, and went inside to grab his forgotten folder. The psychological insight of the ignored is this. When people decide you are failing, they begin to act as though you are already gone. They speak over you. They plan for a future that doesn't include your input. They become sloppy. Later that afternoon, I went to the Central Library. It's a grand limestone building where I spent 22 years of my life. The smell of old paper and floor wax is the only thing that truly feels like home anymore. "Martha, back so soon?" Sarah, the young woman who took over my desk, smiled at me. She still looks at me with respect, which is a rare and precious currency. "Just some personal research, Sarah. I need to look at some old municipal archives, specifically the transfer of titles in the coastal district from 5 years ago." "Of course. Take the key to the basement stacks. It's quieter down there." I spent 4 hours in the cool, dimly lit basement. I didn't use the computer. Those leave digital footprints. I went to the physical ledgers, the heavy books that smell of dust and history. I found the entry for the beach house. The deed hadn't just been hidden, it had been transferred. 5 years ago, Gerald had sold the house to a holding company called Marley Holdings. Martha. Eileen. The audacity of the name felt like a physical slap. He had used a hybrid of our names to hide a property from me, likely thinking it was a clever, private joke. But as I looked closer at the signatures on the transfer papers, I felt a different kind of chill. The witness signature was Claire's. My daughter, my only child, had stood in a notary's office and watched her father move a $3 million asset into a shell company while telling me we were tightening our belts to pay for her master's degree. I sat there in the silence of the library basement, the air heavy with the weight of 30 years of books, and I realized that the rot wasn't just in the floorboards of my marriage. It was in the foundation of everything I had built. I didn't cry. I haven't cried since Leo was born. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a clear, steady photograph of the document. Then, I turned the page and looked for the next piece of the puzzle, the tax filings for Marley Holdings. When I returned home, Eileen was in my kitchen. She was drinking wine from one of my good crystal glasses, the ones I only bring out for Christmas. She was wearing a new silk blouse, a vibrant shade of emerald that made her eyes pop. "There you are," she chirped. "Gerald said you were out wandering. Honestly, Martha, we should get you one of those GPS watches, just for safety." "I was at the library, Eileen. I still know how to find my way to a place I worked for 2 decades. "Of course you do, honey. I've started dinner, a light risotto. Gerald said you've been feeling heavy lately, so I thought something easy on the digestion." She moved around my kitchen with the grace of a woman who already owned it. She knew where the salt was, where the wooden spoons were kept, where I hid the emergency key. She was practicing for the role of the new Mrs. Vance. "That's very thoughtful," I said, sitting at the island. "You've always been so good at taking care of things that aren't yours." Eileen paused, the stirring spoon hovering over the pot. She laughed, a light tinkling sound. "What a funny way to put it. We're family, Martha. What's yours is mine, right?" "Is it?" I asked, tilting my head. "I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Who truly owns what in this house?" Eileen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a glitch in the performance. "You're in a mood. It's the weather. Come, have some wine. Gerald will be home soon, and we're going to look at those patio samples again. I really think the limestone pavers are the way to go." I took the glass she offered. I watched her reflection in the darkened window over the sink. She looked so triumphant. She thought she was winning a prize, a man who betrayed his wife, a house built on silence,
and a fortune stolen from a woman she called sister. She didn't know that I had already seen the doctor Gerald recommended 2 weeks ago on my own. I have the results in my purse. My mind is perfectly clear. The fogginess they see is actually a smokescreen. As I sipped the wine, I wondered if Claire knew about the Marley name. I wondered if she felt a pang of guilt when I bought Leo's school clothes because she couldn't afford the good brands this month. Friday, I said suddenly. What about Friday? Eileen asked. The appointment. Gerald wants me to go on Friday. Why don't you come along, since you're so worried about my memory? Eileen's eyes lit up. Oh, Martha, if you want me there, of course. I'll be right by your side. I smiled. I wanted her there. I wanted her to see the look on the doctor's face when I asked a very specific set of questions. But more than that, I wanted her out of the house for 3 hours on Friday afternoon. Because that was when the forensic accountant I'd hired was coming to go through the floorboards. The trap wasn't just set. It was beginning to hum. There is a specific kind of cruelty in being spoken about as if you are a ghost who hasn't had the decency to leave the room. On Wednesday morning, I found Eileen in my kitchen again. She was wearing a cashmere wrap that looked suspiciously like the one Gerald bought me for our 30th anniversary, the one I lost last winter. She was at the stove, whipping egg whites into a stiff, airy foam. Gerald was sitting at the island, his work laptop open, but he wasn't looking at blueprints. He was watching the way the sunlight caught the gold in Eileen's hair. It's about the guest room, Gerald, Eileen said, her voice bright and professional. If we move the heavy armoire to the basement, we can fit a hospital-grade twin bed in there. It'll make things much easier for the nurses later on. Good thinking, Gerald murmured. Martha's always liked that room anyway. It has the best view of the garden. It'll be peaceful for her when she needs more structured care. I was standing 3 feet away, holding a stack of clean towels. Neither of them looked at me. To them, I was merely a feature of the architecture, like a door that squeaks or a window that needs washing. I was a problem to be solved, a logistics hurdle to be cleared. I don't want a hospital bed, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the whisk. Eileen didn't startle. She simply turned and gave me a smile that was so thick with manufactured pity, it made my skin crawl. Oh, Martha, we're just planning ahead, sweetie. You know how you get. Last week you told Claire you didn't remember where the spare linens were kept. I hadn't forgotten where the linens were. I had simply refused to give them to Claire when she came over to borrow my high thread count sheets for her guest stay, which I now realize was likely a weekend trip with her father and Eileen. I'm right here, I said, setting the towels on the counter. I'm not a project, Eileen. Gerald finally looked up, his expression hardening. Don't be difficult, Martha. We're trying to make sure you're taken care of. Your sister is taking time out of her busy schedule to help us organize the house. The least you can do is be cooperative. Help us organize, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Martha, honey, Eileen said, stepping toward me. She reached out to pat my hand, but I pulled away. Her eyes flickered with a brief, sharp annoyance before returning to their caregiver glaze. We're just worried. You've been so withdrawn. It's a symptom, you know. Withdrawal is often the first sign of cognitive decline. The psychological insight I gained in that moment was profound. They weren't just betraying me. They were building a cage out of my own perceived weaknesses. If they could convince the world, and me, that I was losing my mind, then any protest I made about their affair or their financial theft would be dismissed as the delusions of a sick woman.
It was a perfect, bloodless murder of my autonomy. Later that afternoon, Claire called. "Hey, Mom, look, I'm dropping Leo off for a few hours. I have a spa day with Aunt Eileen. She said you wouldn't mind." "I have a lot to do today, Claire," I said. "Perhaps another time?" There was a long, pointed silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, seriously? Eileen said you're barely doing anything lately. She's worried you're just sitting in the dark. Taking Leo will give you some vitality. Besides, Eileen already paid for my treatment. I can't cancel now." "Eileen paid for it?" "Yeah, she's been so generous lately. She even helped me with the down payment on the new SUV. She's really stepped up since things got hard for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. The money Eileen was using to step up was my money. It was the interest from the accounts Gerald had siphoned into Marley Holdings. They were buying my daughter's loyalty with my own inheritance. "I see," I said. "Bring him over. I'll be here." When Claire arrived, she didn't come in. She unbuckled Leo, handed him his backpack, and pointed him toward my door. She didn't even look at me as I stood on the porch. She was already checking her reflection in the visor mirror, smoothing her hair. She looked like a woman who had successfully rationalized a betrayal by calling it a gift. Leo ran up the steps and hugged my knees. "Grandma, why is Mommy's car so big?" "So she can carry more things, Leo," I said, stroking his hair. "Aunt Eileen says she's going to live in our big house soon. Does that mean you're coming to live with me?" I froze. Is that what she said? "She said you're going to a special hotel where people make your bed every day, like a queen." I let him inside, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A special hotel. They were already looking at facilities. They weren't just planning for my care, they were planning my eviction. I spent the afternoon playing with Leo on the floor, but my mind was in the basement. I had a small floor safe tucked under the workbench, a relic from the previous owners that Gerald never bothered to remove. He thinks it's empty. He thinks the combination was lost decades ago. But I am a librarian. I know how to find information. While Leo napped on the sofa, I went down and opened it. Inside were the originals of our marriage certificate, the title to the house we were currently standing in, and a small blue velvet box. Inside the box wasn't jewelry. It was a set of keys I'd had made in secret. Keys to the beach house in Maine. I also pulled out a thick envelope. It contained 3 months of surveillance photos. Gerald and Eileen at a hotel in the city. Gerald and Eileen holding hands at a jewelry store. Gerald and Eileen looking at assisted living brochures. I heard the front door open. It was too early for Claire. I quickly shut the safe and moved to the laundry area, grabbing a basket of Gerald's shirts. I walked up the stairs just as Gerald and Eileen entered the foyer. They were laughing, their voices intimate and low. "She's in the kitchen with the kid," Eileen whispered. "Good." "It keeps her occupied," Gerald replied. "Did you talk to the director at Pineview?" "I did. They have a suite opening up next month. If we get the medical evaluation on Friday to show significant impairment, we can initiate the power of attorney immediately." "And the main property?" "The papers are ready for Claire to sign her portion over to us. She thinks it's for a trust for Leo." They stopped talking as I reached the top of the stairs. Gerald looked at me, his eyes scanning for any sign that I'd heard. I kept my face blank, my eyes slightly glazed, the way I'd practiced in the mirror. "Oh, Martha," Gerald said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "You're finished with the laundry already? You're such a powerhouse." "I'm just trying to keep up," I said, my voice trailing off.
I let the laundry basket slip slightly, a few of his shirts tumbling onto the floor. Eileen rushed forward, tisking. "Oh, honey, let me. You're clearly exhausted. Why don't you go sit with Leo? I'll finish these." I let her take the basket. I watched her slender, manicured hands touch my husband's clothes. I watched Gerald watch her. "I think I will," I said. "I feel a bit turned around." "Of course you do," Gerald said, ushering me toward the living room. "Friday will fix everything, Martha. The doctor will know exactly what to do." As I sat on the sofa next to my sleeping grandson, I felt the cold weight of the keys in my pocket. They think Friday is the beginning of the end for me. They think they are leading me to a special hotel where I will fade away into the wallpaper. What they don't realize is that the special hotel they've been looking at isn't for me. And the forensic accountant I hired isn't just looking at the Marley accounts. He's looking at the charitable donations Gerald has been making to Eileen's design firm for the last 3 years. Donations that constitute tax fraud on a federal level. I looked at the blue dog drawing Leo had made. I tucked it into my pocket, right next to the keys. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was a blade, and I was finally the one holding the hilt. The exclusion began with the spices. On Thursday morning, I found Eileen in my pantry. She had a large black garbage bag hooked over her arm, and she was methodically clearing the second shelf. My jars of dried tarragon, the smoked paprika I'd ordered from a specialty shop in the city, and the vanilla beans I was saving for Leo's birthday cake were all being swept into the plastic abyss. "What are you doing, Eileen?" I asked, my voice as level as a horizon. She didn't startle. She just kept moving, her movements brisk and efficient. "Oh, Martha, these are all so old. Look at this turmeric. It expired 3 months ago. You shouldn't be cooking with these. They're just collecting dust and attracting silverfish. Gerald and I decided it's safer if I just bring over pre-made meals for a while. It's less confusing for you." "I am not confused by spices," I said. "You say that now," she sighed, finally looking at me with that unbearable, dewy-eyed sympathy. "But Claire told me you put cumin in the oatmeal on Tuesday. You don't even remember doing it, do you?" I hadn't put cumin in the oatmeal. I had watched Eileen do it from the hallway, her back turned, her hands steady as she seasoned my breakfast with a lie. I had simply eaten it in silence, knowing that to protest would only provide the evidence of agitation they were looking for. "I must have been distracted," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Exactly, and that's why we're simplifying things. Gerald is even talking about putting child locks on the stove, just until after the evaluation tomorrow." She walked past me, the bag of my discarded life clucking with the sound of glass hitting glass. She didn't say excuse me. She didn't need to. In her mind, she was already the mistress of the house, and I was merely a tenant whose lease was being terminated. The psychological insight I've gained is that neglect doesn't always look like abandonment. Sometimes it looks like an overabundance of care that smothers your agency. They weren't ignoring me. They were surrounding me with a high-walled garden of their own design, pruning away my habits until there was nothing left of me but the shape they wanted me to take. At noon, Gerald called. He didn't call the house phone, he called my cell. "Martha, I'm just checking in. Eileen says you're having a restless morning." "I'm fine, Gerald. I'm just watching the birds." "Right. Listen, I've moved some funds around. Since you've been forgetful with the bills, I've taken over the primary checking account. I've put you on a prepaid card for your personal things. It'll be easier for everyone to track." "You've cut off my access to our joint account?" "It's for your protection," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth architectural tone he uses for difficult clients. "We don't want any accidental double payments or scams. I'm doing this because I love you, Martha. I hope you realize that." "I realize many things, Gerald." "Good. Don't forget, tomorrow at 2, I'll pick you and Eileen up. Wear that blue dress, the one that makes you look alert." I hung up and went to my desk. I didn't cry. I pulled out my laptop, a refurbished one I keep hidden in a hollowed-out stack of National Geographics in the guest room. I logged into a secure portal. The forensic accountant, a man named Mr. Thorne, who sounds like he's lived on a diet of black coffee and spite, had uploaded a new file. Marley Holdings, expense report, Q3. There it was, a consulting fee of $15,000 paid to EV Designs, Eileen's firm, for aesthetic consultation on the main project. And beneath that, a $20,000 transfer to a bank account in Claire's name, labeled Gift for L. They were laundering our life savings into the hands of my sister and daughter, and they were doing it with the clumsy arrogance of people who believe their victim is already mentally dead. I looked at the blue dress hanging in the closet. It was the dress I wore to Claire's graduation. It was the dress I wore when Gerald told me he'd never loved anyone else. It was a shroud of a better life. I spent the afternoon in the attic. It's the one place Eileen won't go because of the dust and her supposed allergy to the past. I found the old boxes of my mother's journals. My mother had died of Alzheimer's, a slow, agonizing erasure that I had witnessed every day for 6 years. I knew the symptoms better than any doctor. I knew the patterns of speech, the specific way the eyes lose their anchor. I had been studying those journals not for comfort, but for choreography. If Gerald and Eileen wanted a woman who was significantly impaired, I would give them exactly what they needed for their evaluation. But I would do it on my terms, and in a way that would make the power of attorney they were so eager to sign a noose around their own necks. At 5 o'clock, Claire arrived to pick up the pre-made lasagna Eileen had left. She walked into the kitchen, looking harried. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't look me in the eye. "Mom, can you find Leo's blue dog? He says he left it here." "I put it in your car yesterday, Claire," I said. "Well, it's not there. You probably misplaced it. Just forget it. I'll buy him a new one." She sighed, leaning against the counter. "I'm so stressed, Mom. Dad says you're making things really hard for Eileen. Why can't you just let her help? She's doing so much for us." "For us?" I asked. "Or for herself?" Claire's face flushed. "That's exactly the kind of paranoia Dad was talking about. You're turning on everyone, Mom. Even Eileen. She's the only one who actually has the energy to deal with this." She gestured vaguely at me as if this was a stain on the rug. "I'm sorry I'm such a burden, Claire," I said, my voice intentionally soft, trailing off into a whisper. I let my gaze wander to a point just over her shoulder, letting my expression go slightly slack. Did your father call? I think I heard the phone." "The phone didn't ring, Mom. I'm standing right here." Claire's eyes widened with a mix of pity and a terrifying kind of relief. She had found the proof she needed to feel better about the money in her bank account. "See, this is what we mean. You're just not there." She grabbed the lasagna and hurried out, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the hardwood. I watched her car pull away. I went to the hallway and looked at the grandfather clock. I opened the casing and pulled out the small, blue stuffed dog with 5 legs. I hadn't put it in the car. I'd kept it. I tucked it back into the clock, right next to the recording device that had just captured Claire's admission that Gerald was feeding her paranoia narratives. I sat in the dark living room, waiting for Gerald to come home. The neglect was visible now, a physical presence in the empty pantry and the cold stove. They were preparing to move me out of my life, like I was a piece of unwanted furniture. What they didn't realize was that I was the one who had already moved. I was miles ahead of them, waiting at the finish line with a truth they weren't prepared to survive. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I woke up to the sound of Gerald moving through our bedroom with an unfamiliar, heavy-handed urgency. He didn't wait for me to get out of bed. He opened the curtains with a violent snap, letting the gray light flood the room. "Time to get up, Martha. We have a big day." He didn't look at me. He was busy laying out the blue dress on the bench at the foot of our bed.
He smoothed the fabric with his palms, his movements clinical, as if he were prepping a surgical site. "I can dress myself, Gerald," I said, sitting up. My joints felt stiff, a physical manifestation of the emotional armor I had been wearing for weeks. "We don't want to be late," he said, ignoring my protest. He walked over to the nightstand and picked up my watch, the heavy gold one he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. He stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might touch my face. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, not quite painful, but authoritative. He buckled the watch onto my arm. "There," he said, patting my hand. "Now you look like yourself." The psychological insight I sat with as he left the room was this. To Gerald, looking like myself meant looking like a version of me he could still control. He needed me to look respectable so that my decline would seem all the more tragic and undeniable to the doctor. A disheveled woman is just a nuisance. A well-dressed woman losing her mind is a case for legal intervention. I stood in front of the mirror and put on the blue dress. I felt like an actor in a play that had been running for too many seasons. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, the one I wore over the dress, and felt the small, hard edges of the thumb drive. It was my only anchor to reality. The car ride to Dr. Ariscas's office was a masterclass in emotional exclusion. Gerald drove, and Eileen sat in the passenger seat. I was relegated to the back, centered in the rearview mirror like a specimen in a jar. "Did you call Pineview back, Gerald?" Eileen asked, her voice low and melodic. She was reapplying her lipstick, using the visor mirror. "The director said the corner suite has a waiting list, but he could hold it for 48 hours if we provide the preliminary assessment today." "I'll call him after the appointment," Gerald replied. "I want to make sure the paperwork is airtight." "We can't have any hiccups with the power of attorney." "Of course. And Claire? Is she okay with the transition?" "She's fine. She's overwhelmed with work and the kid. She just wants her mother to be safe. She's grateful you're taking the lead on this, Eileen. She says she doesn't have the stomach for the details." They talked as if the back seat were empty. I watched the back of Eileen's head, the perfect honey blonde bob, the way she tilted her neck when she laughed at something Gerald muttered. I saw him reach out and briefly rest his hand on her shoulder as he turned a corner. It wasn't a hidden gesture, it was an indifferent one. They had reached a point of such profound disrespect for my presence that they no longer bothered with the theater of a sibling relationship. I looked out the window at the passing trees. I thought about the main house. I thought about the $15,000 consultation fee Gerald had paid Eileen. They were already spending the spoils of a war they thought I hadn't realized was being fought. We arrived at the medical center, a sterile glass and steel building that felt like a cathedral of bad news. Eileen jumped out of the car and opened my door before I could reach for the handle. "Careful, honey," she said, taking my elbow. The pavement is a bit uneven here. We don't want to fall." She gripped my arm with a strength that felt like an ultimatum. We walked into the waiting room, a space filled with muted beige chairs and outdated magazines. Eileen led me to a seat and then immediately went to the receptionist. "We're here for Martha Vance," she said, her voice projecting just enough concerned family member energy to garner a sympathetic look from the woman behind the desk. "Her husband and I are here to assist with the history. She's been having a difficult time lately." I sat in the chair, my hands folded in my lap. I looked at a brochure on the side table. "Understanding Memory Loss, a Guide for Families." Eileen returned and sat next to me. She pulled a small bottle of sanitizer from her purse and rubbed it into her hands. The scent of isopropyl alcohol and lavender filled the small space between us. "Are you nervous, Martha?" she asked. "I'm observant," I said. Eileen's eyes sharpened. "See, this is what the doctor needs to hear. That word choice, it's a bit formal, isn't it? A bit detached? You've always been so grounded, but lately it's like you're watching a movie instead of living your life." "Perhaps the movie has finally become interesting," I replied. She sighed and leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Gerald is doing this for you, you know. He's heartbroken. We both are. But we can't let you keep living in that house when you're leaving burners on and forgetting your own daughter's phone number." I looked her directly in the eyes. "I haven't forgotten Claire's number, Eileen. I just stopped answering when I realized who was paying her phone bill." The color drained from Eileen's face for a split second. Her hand, still smelling of lavender, twitched on her knee. She opened her mouth to retort, but the door to the inner office opened. "Martha Vance?" a nurse called out. Gerald stood up, adjusting his tie. Eileen stood up, smoothing her skirt. They flanked me like guards. "We'll all go in," Gerald said to the nurse, his voice booming with false confidence. "Martha finds it helpful to have us there to fill in the gaps." The nurse nodded sympathetically. "Of course, right this way." As we walked down the narrow hallway, the silence of the building felt like it was pressing in on my ears. I could hear the rhythm of their breathing. Gerald's heavy and expectant, Eileen's quick and shallow. I knew what was coming. I knew the questions Dr. Ariskis would ask. I knew that Gerald had likely already spoken to him, priming him with stories of my confusion and my wandering. But as we entered the small, brightly lit examination room, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter who had finally lured the prey into the clearing. "Good afternoon, Martha," Dr. Ariskis said, looking up from a tablet. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a tired smile. "I'm glad Gerald and Eileen could join us. Why don't we start by talking about how your week has been?" I sat on the edge of the exam table, the crinkle of the paper beneath me the only sound in the room. I looked at Gerald, then at Eileen. They were both leaning forward, their faces masks of performative concern. "My week has been very illuminating, Doctor," I said. I paused, letting the silence stretch until Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "In fact, I've brought some notes to help me remember the specific details." I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of papers. They weren't notes about my memory. They were the printouts of the Marley Holdings bank statements. The hook was set. Now, I just had to see who would pull the line first. Dr. Ariskis reached for the papers I held, but Gerald's hands shot out, intercepting them with a speed that bordered on violence. He laughed, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed off the sterile white walls. "Oh, Martha, honey," he said, his voice trembling with a forced paternal indulgence. "You're showing the doctor your research again? Doctor, she's been obsessed with these old utility bills and junk mail. She spends hours in the basement sorting them. It's part of the fixation we mentioned." He didn't look at the papers. He didn't need to. He crushed them against his thigh, his knuckles white. I looked at Dr. Ariscus. I made sure my eyes were wide, a little too bright, a little too desperate. They aren't junk, Gerald. I found them in the secret drawer. The one with the names. Marley. It sounds like a French dessert, doesn't it, Doctor? I saw Eileen's throat move as she swallowed. She shifted in her chair, the silk of her skirt whispering. See, Doctor? The word association, the jumping between topics. She's been like this for weeks. She finds patterns where there are none. Dr. Ariscus frowned, his gaze moving between Gerald's clenched fist and my calm, tilted face. Martha, why don't you tell me what you think those papers are? I think they're a map, I said softly. But I can't read maps anymore. The lines all look like snakes. That was the psychological insight I'd gleaned from my mother's journals. A person losing their mind doesn't just forget. They replace reality with metaphors that terrify the people who love them and empower the people who want to control them. By pretending the bank statements were snakes, I was giving Gerald exactly the impairment he wanted, while simultaneously letting him know that I had touched the very thing he thought was buried. I see, Dr. Ariscus said, making a note on his tablet. And Gerald, why did you feel the need to take them from her so quickly? I didn't want her to embarrass herself, Gerald snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I mean, it's painful to see her like this, obsessing over trash. It's not the woman I married. The rest of the appointment was a blur of cognitive tests. I intentionally missed 3 out of 7 on the serial 7s. I misremembered the name of the current vice president. I drew a clock where the numbers were huddled together on the right side, as if they were trying to escape the frame. I watched the concern on Eileen's face grow into a sickening kind of triumph. She would occasionally reach out to pat my knee, her touch light and fleeting, like a bird of prey testing the wind. When we left the office, the air outside felt heavy with the scent of rain. Gerald didn't speak until we were locked inside the car. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there, clutching the steering wheel. "Where did you get those, Martha?" he asked. His voice was low, stripped of the false warmth he'd used in the office. "The drawer," I said, staring straight ahead at the windshield wipers. "The one behind the books about the buildings." "I told you to stay out of my study," he hissed. "I was looking for my knitting needles. I thought maybe they'd turned into papers too." Eileen leaned forward from the back seat, her hand resting on the headrest next to Gerald's ear. "It doesn't matter, Gerald. Did you see the doctor's face? He's going to sign the preliminary. We can move forward with Pineview. She's clearly not safe in that house if she's digging through your files and hallucinating snakes." "She's not hallucinating," Gerald muttered, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. He finally turned the key. The engine roared to life, a predatory sound in the small space. "She's just gone." The drive home was silent. I looked at the back of Gerald's neck, the familiar crease in his skin, the way his hair was thinning at the crown. I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were looking at him through the wrong end of a telescope. This was the man I had shared a bed with for 3 decades. This was the man who had held my hand while I labored with Claire. Now, he was calculating the cost of my disappearance. When we reached the house, Eileen didn't leave. She followed us inside, already taking her coat off as if she lived there. "I'll make some tea," she said. "Martha, why don't you go upstairs and lie down? All those questions must have been so taxing for your poor brain." "I'm not tired," I said. "I want to look at my photos." I walked into the living room and sat on the floor in front of the gallery wall.
I didn't look at the photos of us. I looked at the gaps between the frames. I looked at the dust. From the kitchen, I heard the low murmur of their voices. "We need to find where she's keeping the rest of it," Gerald whispered.
If she found the Marley files, she might have found the main deed. She said she was looking for knitting needles, Eileen replied. She's not a spy, Gerald. She's a librarian with a broken brain. Even if she saw the deed, she wouldn't know what it meant. She'd probably think it was a recipe for pie. I don't like it. She was always too smart for her own good. Was, Eileen emphasized. Key word. Now, focus on the facility. Once she's in Pineview, we can clear out the study properly. Claire is coming over tomorrow to help pack some of Martha's things. It'll be easier if it's a family effort. I sat on the floor, my fingers tracing the pattern of the rug. They were planning to have my daughter help dismantle my life under the guise of moving me. The psychological insight I had then was the most painful one yet. Betrayal is a collaborative art. They needed Claire's participation to make the lie feel like a tragedy instead of a crime. And Claire needed the gifts they gave her to make her participation feel like a necessity instead of a choice. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, cold shape of the thumb drive. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought my world was shrinking into a blur of confusion and metaphor. What they didn't know was that while I was in the office failing my clock test, my phone, tucked into the side pocket of my purse and left on the doctor's desk, had been recording the entire private conversation Gerald and Eileen had with Dr. Ariscus while I was in the bathroom. I stood up, my knees cracking in the quiet room. "Eileen?" I called out, my voice thin and wavering. She appeared in the doorway, a steaming mug in her hand. "Yes, honey?" "I can't find the photo of the beach," I said, letting a single tear track down my cheek. "The one with the big porch. Did the snakes take it?" Eileen smiled, a look of pure, unadulterated relief. "The beach house was a long time ago, Martha. You just forgot. Now come, drink your tea." I took the mug. I let her lead me to the sofa. I played the part of the broken woman, the invisible wife, the grandmother who was just not there. But as I took a sip of the tea, I was already counting the hours until tomorrow. Tomorrow, when Claire would come to pack my things. Tomorrow, when the forensic accountant would send the final report. And tomorrow, when I would stop being a ghost and start being a reckoning. On Saturday morning, the house felt like a staging ground. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard and packing tape. Gerald didn't ask if I wanted breakfast. He brought me a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal and a glass of water, placing them on the nightstand like a tray in a hospital room. "Stay in bed for a bit, Martha," he said, his hand hovering near my forehead as if checking for a fever he hoped to find. "Claire and Eileen are coming over to help organize the upstairs. It'll be too much noise for you." "I like the noise," I whispered, pulling the duvet up to my chin. "It sounds like a party." Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's not a party, honey. It's a transition. We need to get the guest room cleared out so we can prepare for the movers." He reached for my purse, which was sitting on the vanity. He didn't hide the gesture. He picked it up and tucked it under his arm. "I'll hold on to your wallet and keys, Martha. You won't be needing them today, and we don't want you misplacing them again. You remember how upset you got when you lost your credit card last week?" I hadn't lost my credit card. I had used it to pay the retainer for Mr. Thorne, the forensic accountant. Gerald had found the charge and assumed I'd been scammed or was simply confused. I let him believe it. "The keys are for the car," I said, my voice intentionally trembling. I need to go to the grocery store. We're out of the tea Leo likes. Eileen already did the shopping, Martha. Everything is taken care of. Just rest. He left the room, locking the door from the outside. It was a soft click, barely audible, but it vibrated through my bones. This was the imbalance in its purest form. He had the keys, the money, and the narrative. I had the oatmeal. The psychological insight of the captive is that you begin to measure time by the sounds of your captors. I heard the front door open. I heard Claire's voice, high-pitched and frantic, and Eileen's calm, melodic responses. They moved into the hallway, their footsteps heavy with purpose. "We'll start with the jewelry and the linens," Eileen said. "The director at Pineview said she's only allowed 2 suitcases of personal items. We should pick the things that don't have too much sentimental weight. It'll make the detachment easier for her." "Is she really that bad, Aunt Eileen?" Claire asked. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, a flicker of the daughter she used to be. "Yesterday she seemed... she knew about the SUV." "A flash in the pan, Claire," Eileen replied. "Common in the early stages of a total collapse. She's just repeating things she's heard. It's a defense mechanism. She doesn't actually understand the context." I sat up in bed and reached under the mattress. I pulled out the burner phone I'd bought 3 weeks ago at a pharmacy across town. I checked the messages. Thorn. "The shell company Marley has a secondary beneficiary. It's not just your sister. There's a third signature on the offshore account. Look for a name starting with R." R. I didn't know an R. I heard my bedroom door unlock. I quickly slid the phone back under the mattress and lay down, closing my eyes. Claire and Eileen entered. They didn't knock. They walked to my dresser and began opening drawers. The sound of sliding wood and rustling fabric felt like they were peeling back my skin. "She's asleep," Eileen whispered. "Good. Claire, take that pearl strand. It was Grandma's. Martha won't need it where she's going, and it would look lovely on you for the fundraiser next week." "I don't know, Eileen. It feels like stealing." "It's an inheritance, honey. Just an early one. Think of it as a gift from a mother who can't express herself anymore. Besides, Gerald said he wanted you to have it." I watched them through the slit of my eyelids. I watched my daughter take the pearls my mother had given me on my wedding day. She held them for a moment, her thumb tracing the luster of the stones, before dropping them into her designer handbag. "What about the beach house photos?" Claire asked, pointing to the framed picture on the wall. "Leave it for now," Eileen said. "We don't want to trigger an episode. We'll take the house itself soon enough. Once the power of attorney is finalized on Monday, the sale can go through. The buyers are already lined up." "Wait, you're selling the main house already?" Claire's voice rose slightly. "I thought we were keeping it for Leo." "The maintenance is too high, Claire, and your father needs the liquidity to ensure Martha has the best care. You'll get your share, don't worry. It's all in the trust." The dependency was a cage, but it was also a vantage point. Because they thought I was a hollowed-out shell, they spoke with a terrifying transparency. They weren't just moving me to a facility. They were liquidating my entire history to fund the life they intended to lead without me. "Martha," Eileen said, stepping closer to the bed. I opened my eyes slowly, letting them wander before focusing on her face. "Is it time for the party?" Eileen smiled, that sharp, practiced mask of hers. "No, honey, we're just tidying up. Why don't you come downstairs? Claire brought Leo. He wants to show you something." I let them lead me down the stairs. My legs felt weak, not from illness, but from the sheer weight of the performance. In the living room, Leo was sitting on the floor with a set of wooden blocks. When he saw me, he jumped up and ran over. "Grandma, look! I built the beach house!" He pointed to a lopsided tower of blocks. He had stuck a small piece of blue paper to the top, a scrap from his drawing of the dog. "It's beautiful, Leo," I said, sitting heavily in my armchair. "Daddy says we can't go there anymore because the water got too high," Leo said, his brow furrowed. "But I told him I'm a good swimmer." Gerald, who was standing by the fireplace, cleared his throat. "Leo, go play in the den for a minute. The adults need to talk." Once the child was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It became clinical. Gerald sat on the ottoman in front of me, leaning in so close I could smell the peppermint he used to mask the scent of scotch. "Martha, we have some papers for you to sign. Just some routine things for the insurance. Eileen and Claire are going to witness." He held out a gold pen, the one I'd given him when he made partner. He placed a document on the coffee table. I could see the heading, Durable Power of Attorney. "What does it say, Gerald?" I asked, my hand hovering over the paper. "It just says we love you," he whispered. "It says we're going to take care of everything so you don't have to worry anymore. Just sign here, at the bottom." I looked at the line. I looked at Eileen, who was nodding encouragingly. I looked at Claire, who was staring at the floor, her hand clutching her bag where my pearls were hidden. "Does R love me too?" I asked. The room went deathly silent. Gerald's hand, which had been resting on the table, twitched. Eileen's breath hitched. "What did you say, Martha?" Gerald asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The letter," I said, tilting my head. "On the blue dog. It had an R. I thought maybe it was a friend." Gerald exhaled, a long, shaky breath of relief. He looked at Eileen and rolled his eyes. "She's talking about Leo's drawings again. For God's sake, Martha, just sign the paper." I picked up the pen. My hand shook, a perfect imitation of a woman losing her grip on the world. I began to lower the nib to the paper, but as I did, I noticed something. On the underside of the coffee table, right where Gerald's knee was resting, was a small black device I hadn't seen before. It wasn't one of mine. I didn't sign. I dropped the pen, letting it clatter across the hardwood floor. "I can't," I whimpered, pulling my hands into my lap. "The ink, it looks like snakes." Gerald let out a frustrated growl, but Eileen stepped in, her voice soothing. "It's okay, Gerald. We'll try again tonight after she's had her medication. She's just tired." They led me back upstairs, but I wasn't thinking about the power of attorney. I was thinking about that black device. Someone else was listening to this family. And if it wasn't me, and it wasn't Thorne, who was it? The dependency was no longer just a burden. It was becoming a maze. And for the first time, I realized I might not be the only one wandering through the dark. The Sunday morning sun felt intrusive, cutting through the curtains of my bedroom like a searchlight. I lay still, listening to the house. It was breathing, a rhythmic series of clicks and groans that I've known for decades. But now, there was a new frequency, a digital hum that only I seemed to hear. I thought about the black device under the coffee table. It was small, sleek, and professional, far more sophisticated than the retail-grade recorder I'd tucked into the grandfather clock. Someone wasn't just recording. They were transmitting. I waited until I heard Gerald's shower start. I slipped out of bed, my movements ghost quiet. I didn't go for my robe. I stayed in my nightgown, looking every bit the fragile, wandering woman they wanted me to be. I made my way downstairs. The living room was shadowed, the air smelling of last night's tension and Eileen's lingering perfume. I knelt by the coffee table, my joints complaining. I reached underneath, my fingers grazing the cold plastic of the bug. I didn't remove it. If I took it, Whoever was listening would know the senile wife was compromised. Instead, I pulled a small vanity mirror from my pocket and angled it to see the serial number. Model RX440. I memorized the digits. As I stood up, the front door clicked open. I didn't jump. I simply turned toward the door and let my jaw hang slightly slack, my eyes unfocused. It was Eileen. She had her own key now, a silver one that Gerald had given her for emergencies. She was carrying a bag of fresh bagels and a bouquet of yellow roses that looked like a taunt. "Martha, you're up early," she said, her voice a forced trill of cheerfulness. She didn't come toward me. She stayed by the door, observing me like a scientist watching a moth in a jar. "Are you looking for something on the floor, honey?" "I thought I saw a penny," I whispered. "Gerald says we need to save our pennies for the special hotel." Eileen's expression softened into that terrifying predatory pity. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to worry about pennies. We have everything under control. Why don't you go sit at the table? I'll make us some coffee." "Is R coming for coffee?" I asked, tilting my head. Eileen froze. The bag of bagels crinkled in her grip. "Why do you keep saying that name, Martha? Who is R?" "He has a loud voice," I said, beginning to hum a tuneless song as I shuffled past her toward the kitchen. "He talks in the walls." I saw the flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. It was a small victory, but a sweet one. She thought I was hallucinating, but the possibility that I might be hearing something real, something she didn't know about, was clearly eating at her. The psychological insight of being gaslit is that eventually, the light becomes clearer for the victim than the perpetrator. Because they are so busy maintaining the lie, they lose track of the truth. I was the only one in the room who knew exactly what was performance and what was reality. Sunday lunch was a tableau of domestic dysfunction. Claire arrived with Leo, looking more exhausted than ever. She sat at the table, her hand resting on the designer bag that held my mother's stolen pearls. Gerald presided over the meal, carving a roast with a precision that felt surgical. "We've looked over the Pineview contract, Claire," Gerald said, gesturing with the carving knife. "They have an opening on Tuesday. We think it's best to move quickly. The doctor's report was very definitive." Claire looked at me, then quickly looked away. "Tuesday? That's so soon. I haven't even told Leo that Grandma's leaving." "The longer we wait, the harder it is for everyone," Eileen added, reaching over to pat Claire's hand. "Martha is already slipping away, Claire. Look at her. She's barely touched her carrots. She's not here with us anymore." I was, in fact, counting the number of times Gerald checked his watch. He was nervous. He kept glancing toward the foyer, his ears pricked for a sound that wasn't Leo's chatter. "I want to go to the beach," I said suddenly, my voice loud in the quiet room. "We've talked about this, Martha," Gerald said, his voice tight. "The beach house is gone. It was sold years ago." "But R says the water is fine," I replied. I looked directly at Gerald. "He says the basement is dry. He says the signature is very pretty." Gerald dropped the carving fork. It clattered against the china, a sharp, violent sound. "Enough. I won't have this nonsense at the table. You're confused, you're making things up, and you're upsetting your daughter." "Dad, it's okay," Claire whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "She doesn't mean it." "No, she's doing it on purpose," Gerald hissed, leaning across the table toward me. His face was flushed, the mask of the doting husband finally cracking. "You think this is a game, Martha? You think you can just babble and ruin everything I've built?" "Gerald, sit down,"
Eileen said, her voice sharp with warning. She glanced toward the coffee table in the other room. She knew. She suspected the house wasn't as private as they thought. The tension in the room was a physical weight, an imbalance that was becoming unsustainable. Gerald's dependency on the lie was making him volatile, while my confusion was giving me a freedom I hadn't possessed in years. After lunch, while Claire was putting Leo down for a nap in the den, I slipped into Gerald's study. I knew he had my purse in the locked drawer of his desk. I also knew that he kept the spare key in the base of the bronze lamp, a habit he'd had for 30 years. I opened the drawer. I didn't take my purse. Instead, I took his cell phone, which he'd left charging. I bypassed the lock. I'd watched him enter the code 102492. Our anniversary. A final, bitter irony. And went to his call logs. There were dozens of calls to a number labeled only as Reginald. Reginald. R. I scrolled further. There were texts. Reginald. The buyer is getting impatient. If the POA isn't signed by Monday, the deal for the main property is off. And the IRS inquiry into the consulting fees won't go away just because you move your wife. Gerald. I'll have it tomorrow. She's practically a vegetable. The daughter is on board. Just keep the auditors off my back for 24 more hours. I felt a cold, sharp chill. This wasn't just about a beach house and a sister. This was about federal fraud. Gerald was being squeezed by someone named Reginald, likely a fixer or a corrupt lawyer, and he was using my dementia as a legal shield to liquidate assets and cover his tracks. But then I saw the most recent text, sent only 10 minutes ago. Reginald, I'm outside. Why is the blonde looking at the coffee table? Does she know I'm listening? My heart stopped. I looked toward the window.
Through the slats of the blinds, I saw a black sedan idling at the end of the driveway. Someone was watching the house. Someone was listening to every word. And that person wasn't on Gerald's side. He was a predator who had found a bigger predator to feast on. I heard Gerald's footsteps in the hallway. Martha, are you in there? I quickly set the phone back on the charger and slid the drawer shut. I turned to face the door just as it opened. What are you doing at my desk? He demanded, his eyes scanning the room. I was looking for the blue dog, I said, my voice small and trembling. I think he's hiding in the letters. Gerald took 2 long strides toward me and grabbed my upper arms. His grip was bruising. There are no dogs here. There is only me. And tomorrow, you are signing those papers or I will make sure you never see Leo again. Do you understand me? I looked into his eyes, the eyes of a man I had loved for half my life, and I saw nothing but a hollow, desperate greed. I understand, I whispered. I understood that the house was surrounded. I understood that the R who was listening was likely the same R who was ready to devour Gerald the moment I signed my life away. And I understood that tomorrow, I wouldn't be signing a power of attorney. I would be signing a confession. Not mine, his. The night before the signing felt like the eve of an execution, though everyone in the house was pretending it was just a quiet Sunday evening. Gerald was drinking his scotch with a frantic rhythm, the ice clinking against the glass like a countdown. Eileen had stayed for dinner, and she was now methodically labeling boxes in the hallway. Bedroom, linens, she wrote in thick black marker. The sound of the nib dragging across the cardboard was a harsh, screeching noise that set my teeth on edge. I sat in my usual chair, the one that faces the garden, though now the view was blocked by a stack of plastic bins. I was holding a ball of gray yarn, my fingers moving through the motions of knitting without any needles. I needed them to see me as completely unanchored. "She's been doing that for an hour," Gerald muttered to Eileen, gesturing toward me with his glass. "Just air knitting. It's eerie." "It's repetitive motion, Gerald," Eileen replied without looking up. "It's a comfort thing, like a child with a blanket. It just proves how much she needs the structure of a facility. She can't even hold a thought, let alone a needle." The psychological insight of the long-term wife is knowing that men like Gerald don't actually want a partner. They want a mirror that only reflects their own importance. Now that I was broken, I was no longer a mirror. I was a cracked piece of glass he wanted to sweep into a dustpan and throw away. I looked at the coffee table. I knew Reginald was listening. I wondered if he was bored. I wondered if he enjoyed the sound of a family dismantling itself for the sake of a beach house and a few tax dodges. "I need to go to the bathroom," I said, standing up. I made sure my movements were shaky, my hand reaching out to steady myself on the arm of the chair. "Do you need help, Martha?" Eileen asked, her voice dripping with that artificial saccharine concern. "I know where the door is," I whispered. "It's next to the picture of the dog." I walked down the hallway, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I slipped into the laundry room and closed the door. I pulled the burner phone from the pocket of my cardigan, the one Gerald hadn't checked because he thought it was filled with old tissues. I sent a message to Thorne. The R is Reginald. He's bugged the living room. RX440. He's pressuring G about the IRS. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. is the signing. Thorne's reply was almost instant. Understood. The third signature on the offshore account isn't Reginald, it's Rebecca. Does that mean anything to you? Rebecca. I felt the floor tilt. I leaned against the washing machine, the cold metal pressing through my nightgown. I didn't know a Rebecca. I searched my mind, the librarian's internal card catalog flipping through decades of names. Clients? Neighbors? Old friends? Then it hit me. Claire's middle name is Rebecca. My daughter. My only child. She wasn't just a passive participant being bought off with gifts and SUVs. She was a named beneficiary on an offshore account tied to the shell company that held my stolen assets. She was part of the legal structure of the betrayal. I felt a wave of nausea so potent, I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. It was one thing to be betrayed by a husband who had grown bored, and a sister who had always been envious. It was another entirely to be sold out by the child I had carried, the girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, the woman whose career I had funded with my own sacrifices. I heard the laundry room door handle turn. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and grabbed a stray towel from the dryer. Eileen stepped in, her eyes narrow. "What are you doing in here, Martha? You said you were going to the bathroom." "The towels felt cold," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to me. "I thought they might be lonely." Eileen sighed, a sound of profound irritation. "God, Martha, you're getting worse by the hour. Come on, back to the living room. Gerald wants us to have a family meeting before bed." She led me back like a stray dog. Gerald was standing by the fireplace, the gold pen from earlier resting on the mantel like a scepter. "Martha, sit down," he said. "Claire's on the speakerphone." I sat. The room was silent except for the faint hiss of the speaker. "Mom?" Claire's voice came through, sounding thin and distorted. "Are you there?" "I'm here, Claire Rebecca," I said. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Claire never used her middle name. She hated it. She said it sounded old-fashioned. "We just want to make sure you're okay with tomorrow," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly.
It's for the best, Mom. You'll have gardens and people to talk to, and you won't have to worry about the stove or the bills anymore. Will you come visit me? I asked. In the special hotel? Of course I will, every week, and I'll bring Leo. And the pearls? I asked. Will you wear the pearls? I saw Gerald's eyes fly to Eileen. Eileen's face went rigid. On the phone, there was a long, suffocating silence. I don't know what you mean, Mom, Claire whispered. The ones from Grandma, I said, my voice regaining a terrifying clarity for just a moment. The ones you put in your bag yesterday while I was sleeping. They're very heavy, aren't they? The weight of an inheritance is always more than you expect. Gerald stepped forward, his face turning a dark, mottled purple. That's enough. Eileen, take her upstairs, now. I'm not finished talking to my daughter, I said, standing my ground. You're finished when I say you're finished, Gerald shouted. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it until I gasped. You're a sick woman, Martha. You're delusional, and you're making accusations because your brain is rotting. Tomorrow morning, you will sign those papers, or I will have you committed to a state ward before noon. Do you hear me? No fancy suite at Pineview, no visits from Leo. Just a locked room and a plastic tray. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't hide the disgust in my eyes. The performance was slipping because the pain was too great. You wouldn't, I whispered. Try me, he hissed. Eileen grabbed my other arm. Come on, Martha. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You're just confused. You'll feel better after your pill. They marched me up the stairs, 2 jailers with the faces of my family. They pushed me into my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. My wrist throbbed where Gerald had gripped it. I could hear them downstairs, their voices muffled but urgent. They were arguing now, about the pearls, about what I had said, about the R they still didn't realize was listening to every word of their panic. I reached under the mattress and pulled out the burner phone. One more message. Thorne. I need the police at the house tomorrow at 10:15 a.m. Not for a welfare check, for a domestic violence and fraud report. I have the recording of the threat he just made. I looked at the locked door. I looked at the suitcases Eileen had already packed for me. The imbalance was absolute. They had the power, the keys, and my daughter. But I had something they hadn't accounted for. I had the truth, and I had the patient, cold-blooded resolve of a librarian who had spent her life finding the one thing that didn't belong in the record. The curiosity hook wasn't about whether I would sign. It was about what was in the second manila envelope I had hidden inside the water tank of the toilet. The one with the Rebecca signature on a document that hadn't even been filed yet. I lay back on the pillows and closed my eyes. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't the silence of a museum. It was the silence of a fuse burning down in the dark. Monday morning was a study in cold gray light. The house felt like a theatrical set where the actors had forgotten their lines but were determined to finish the play. Gerald was dressed in his finest charcoal suit, the one he wore for court appearances or multi-million-dollar closings. Eileen was a vision in muted taupe, her jewelry kept to a minimum, a calculated look of somber family support. They unlocked my door at 9:30 a.m. Time to go downstairs, Martha, Gerald said. His voice was steady, but I could see the slight tremor in his jaw. He hadn't slept. He looked like a man who had spent the night staring at the monster under his bed, only to realize the monster was his own bank statement. I didn't argue. I didn't whisper about snakes or dogs.
I walked down the stairs with a slow, deliberate pace. I took my seat in the armchair. On the coffee table lay the power of attorney documents, flanked by a fresh pot of tea that smelled of jasmine and betrayal. "Where's Claire?" I asked. "She's on her way," Eileen said, smoothing her skirt. "She'll be here to witness. It's important we do this as a family." The front door opened. It wasn't Claire. A tall man in a navy trench coat stepped into the foyer. He had a sharp, angular face and eyes that looked like they were made of flint. This was the R Gerald had been texting. Reginald. Gerald stood up, his face pale. "Reginald, you're early. I told you, 10:30. Reginald didn't look at Gerald. He looked at me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The schedule has changed, Gerald. There are complications." "What complications?" Eileen snapped, her voice rising an octave. "Who is this, Gerald? I thought you said the lawyer was coming." "I am the lawyer," Reginald said, stepping into the living room. He pulled a folder from his bag. "But I'm not here for the power of attorney. I'm here for the audit." The psychological insight of the predator is that they never expect to be the prey. I watched the blood drain from Gerald's face. He looked at the coffee table, then at the bug he'd forgotten was there, then at me. "Martha?" he whispered. I stood up. I didn't use the arms of the chair for support. I stood straight, the decades of emotional labor and caregiving falling off me like a heavy, tattered cloak. My voice, when I spoke, was the voice of the head librarian at the Municipal Archives, the woman who had managed 40 employees and a $5 million budget before Gerald decided she was just a housewife. "The tea is cold, Eileen," I said. "And the performance is over." "Martha, what are you doing?" Eileen gasped, reaching out for my arm. I stepped back, out of her reach. "Reginald isn't your fixer, Gerald. He's not the man helping you hide the Marley funds or the main deed. He's a specialist in forensic estate law. He's been on my personal payroll for exactly 14 months. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum forming in the center of the room. 14 months? Gerald's voice was a ragged ghost of itself. But the fogginess, the kettle, the snakes. "A librarian knows how to tell a story, Gerald," I said, my voice calm and devastating. "I knew about the affair with my sister 3 years ago. I knew about the bad investments before you even filed the first fake tax return. I didn't leave then because I needed to see how deep the rot went. I needed to see if my own daughter would put a price tag on her mother's life." As if on cue, the front door opened again. Claire walked in, holding Leo's hand. She stopped dead when she saw the tableau in the living room. "Mom?" she whispered. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the stolen pearls around her neck. "Take them off, Claire Rebecca. They don't belong to you. Not yet. Not ever, if the police decide your signature on the offshore account constitutes conspiracy." Claire's hand flew to her throat. She looked at Gerald, then at the man in the trench coat. "Dad, you said she didn't know. You said it was a trust for Leo." "It is a trust for Leo," I said. "Because this morning at 8 a.m., the Marley accounts were legally frozen, and the assets transferred to a protected educational fund that neither you, nor your father, nor your aunt can touch. Ever." Eileen let out a choked, animal sound of rage.
She lunged toward the coffee table, reaching for the power of attorney papers, as if she could still force the world back into the shape she wanted.
Reginald moved faster, his hand pinning the documents to the table. "Don't," he said. It wasn't a request. I walked over to the grandfather clock. I opened the casing and pulled out my small recorder. Then, I reached under the coffee table and pulled off the R bug. "I've been listening to you for weeks," I said, looking at Gerald. "I heard you talking about the special hotel. I heard you talking about the liquidity you needed. I even heard you talking about the suite at Pineview." I leaned in close to him, so close I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "I'm not going to Pineview, Gerald, but you might want to look into their rates. Because after the divorce settlement and the IRS whistleblower reward I'm about to receive, you're going to need a very small, very cheap place to live." "You can't do this," Eileen hissed, her face contorted. "We're family." "Family is a record of trust, Eileen," I said, turning to her. "You deleted yourself from my record a long time ago. I just waited for the right time to close the book." I walked to the foyer and picked up the small suitcase I had packed myself, the one they didn't know about. Inside wasn't sentimental items. It was my passport, my personal bank books, and Leo's blue dog drawing. "Where are you going?" Claire cried, her voice cracking. "Mom, wait!" I stopped at the door. I looked at my daughter, and for a moment, the old pain flared, the mother who wanted to forgive. But then I saw the pearls. "I'm going to the beach house, Claire," I said. "The one in Maine. The one I've owned outright for 3 days now, thanks to a very clever buyback Reginald arranged through the shell company you so kindly helped manage." I looked at Leo, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. "I'll call you when I'm settled, Leo," I said, my voice softening. "Grandma is going to build a real house, one with 5 legs and a blue roof." I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, but for the first time in 30 years, I could breathe. I heard the sirens in the distance, the police Thorne had called, coming to collect the statements and the evidence of the consulting fees. I didn't look back. I got into the car Reginald had waiting. As we pulled away, I looked at the house in the rearview mirror. It looked small. It looked like a museum where all the exhibits had finally been packed away. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was empty. And in that emptiness, I finally found the woman I had been hiding for a long time. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a ghost. She was free.